The issue is, like, Russia legitimately, I legitimately think that Russia right now is the biggest threat to world security. Because as we all know, there are two things that are going to end the world, okay? There are two possible things that could do it. Climate change and nuclear war. There are other edge cases like disease or a comet or meteor or whatever, but to me, those are the two big ones. It's climate change and nuclear war. Those are, to me, far and above the most likely things to end the world, okay? And the issue that I have is that there are there are two ways to exacerbate those, right? Climate change and its threat is promoted most by the American Republican Party. If the world dies to climate change or is severely harmed by it, they will be the ones who stand to blame the most. There is no other institution so singly responsible for the offsetting of our global effort to, reduce carbon emissions. There's nothing else even comes close. America could have led the world, but we don't. If the Republican Party had the same position on this as the Democratic Party, we would be miles ahead of where we are now. And even that milquetoast Democratic Party position would be infinitely preferable to what we have right now. But whatever. And the other big critical thing is nuclear war, okay? And to my mind, right now, with what Russia's doing with the Ukraine. Sorry, I just hear the Ukraine so much because I've played so many games that are set in the Cold War era that when I hear Ukraine, I just think of the Ukraine. Ukraine, an autonomous nation, being threatened by Russia. I think that's the biggest spark plug for nuclear war right now. Neither of those would end all the world. It would do a lot. It would do a lot. Now, generally speaking, I think it's India and Pakistan that are the big risks here. The thing that gets me is, unless there's some catastrophic failure of command, like somebody goes rogue or there's a miscommunication, I don't think that America is going to start the nuclear war. We're the only country to have ever actually used two nuclear weapons, but we did so when no other country had nuclear weapons. Right now, the use of nuclear weapons would, in all likelihood, trigger a nuclear war. And America doesn't stand to benefit from that. There's not really a part of America, at least not a relevant part, I don't think, that stands to benefit from that. Or to put it more accurately, there are powerful interests that want to avoid that. See, nuclear war would not really discriminate by class very much, you know? It's not like all the wealthy people would be like instantly teleported to their nuclear bunkers and then emerge at the same quality of life that they have now. In reality, apart from some very well-protected politicians, nuclear war would not discriminate in who died. They would be a lot of people. So because America is controlled principally by moneyed interests, capitalists, you know, the supply chain would be, let's say, damaged somewhat by nuclear Armageddon. It would be hurt. It would cause problems with your Amazon delivery dates, okay? Because America is basically just a bunch of corporations stacked on top of each other wearing a trench coat and a fedora, I don't think that we're going to engage in military behavior that would compromise our supply chains, you know? I don't think we would do that. At least not to that extent. Russia, on the other hand, I think at least the Russian government is motivated by a different set of interests, you know? I don't think the Russian people are all like crazy. I said before in a video that I released that they were drunk on blood. I think that was irresponsible rhetoric. I didn't want to imply that the Russian people were uniquely bloodthirsty or monstrous. Rather, that the Russian people have been, and this is true, taken by nationalistic fervor in a way that I find quite discomforting. I guess you could say the same thing about Americans, really. I retract the comment entirely. It was irresponsible. It doesn't really matter because the Russian government is barely democratic. And I think they're motivated by a different set of interests. Russia's economy sucks. Russia sucks, you know? If there's any guy who would risk nuclear warfare to achieve some flash of nationalistic glory, it would be Putin. I do think that. I genuinely believe that. He's enough of an egomaniac, maybe, possibly. Maybe it's not even Russia that's a geopolitical threat. Maybe it's Putin, you know? Maybe it might actually be as simple as that. He's one of the very few genuine autocrats, you know? Because those aren't very common. There are other countries that have dictators where the dictators aren't really in charge at all, you know? Go over to North Korea, for example. I do not think the Kim family is like the leading power. I think that North Korea, in reality, is probably really governed by a collection of bureaucrats and generals, and that the dynasty just kind of, they're like not that they're powerless, but they're heavily advised by the real leaders, and they need to consolidate things through a figurehead, and that's very common historically. That's not at all an uncommon thing. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it's more common for a council to rule through a figurehead than for a figurehead to rule genuinely as an autocrat. It's really difficult to rule singly. But Putin, I think, actually does that. I actually think he is in control. That's the impression that I get. I think the same thing about Assad. What about Stalin? I feel the same way about Stalin. I don't know if I feel the same way about Hitler. From what I've read about Stalin and Hitler, I feel like, to put it another way, I feel like Stalin's advisors were terrified of him, but Hitler was coked out enough that he was led around a good bit by his much more competent propaganda ministers, people who held high political and military offices. I don't think Hitler was intelligent or competent enough to be a single autocrat. Putin is very smart. No denying that. Stalin, I don't know if it's so much him being smart as him being incredibly vicious, which is the feeling that I get. What about Trumpy Boy? Trumpy Boy was a mouthpiece for the interests of the party he represented. Same with Biden. In our country, there's no real single presidential leader. They are mouthpieces for a conglomerate of interests, some corporate, some political. But as is the case with all consolidations of power, the more you consolidate power, the more tenuous and unstable that power system becomes. So if Putin really is in control, I mean genuinely in control of the country, all it would take is a mental break for warfare with him. If the President of the United States had a mental break and tried to declare war, nothing would happen. Don't get me wrong, the president has a lot of power to work behind the scenes, but if they just, in a flippant emotional rage, they would be held back by a ton of systems that are meant to control individual outbursts of action. Not the least of which, it almost happened with Trump. There are systems for that. It's a checks and balances thing. All it takes is some trigger-happy officers. It depends on the severity of the action. It almost happened? Sorry, maybe I should be more specific with my language. Checks and balances only function, how do I say this? The existence of any checks and balances at all is something that we should be thankful for. Trump weakened many of them significantly. They've been being weakened for a long time. But I don't think, and I'm sure you would agree with me on this, I don't think there really are that many on Putin. I admit to a degree of ignorance on this, but I have a feeling that if Putin wanted something to happen, it would just be a matter of how to get it done. I don't think there'd really be a meaningful check on that. I do think that would happen with the Kim dynasty. If one of them wanted to do something, there would be military members and so on and so forth who would be like, let me question your wisdom for a moment. But stuff like that. So the more you consolidate, the more individual outbursts become an issue. This is one of the reasons why absolute monarchies were markedly inferior to constitutional monarchies. People sometimes laugh at constitutional monarchies because it's still a monarchy, so like whatever. But having anything, even the law, which the autocrat sits below, is incredibly important. You're wrong about Putin. The U.S. State Department's own internal documents about Russia find Putin to be far weaker than his public image portrays it. Let's see. So the kind of weakness that this is, before I look at it, matters a lot. If the weakness is about his ability to enforce his will abroad, or his power, or his economic well-being, I get that. I do think that Russia is decaying. If the power at hand is about his ability to influence Russia itself, that's what I'm saying he has. Russia is weak, but within Russia, Putin, I think, is strong. So let me see here. Perhaps I'm entirely wrong, in which case I will try to reassess. Let me see. So these are from content of the United States Diplomatic Cables Leak, analysis of individual leaders. The United States Diplomatic Cables leaked by WikiLeaks, how fun, contain personal analyses of world leaders by U.S. ambassadors and their corresponding countries and officials of foreign governments. These details proved to be quite embarrassing to both those leaders as well as U.S. officials who worked in the cables. Well, there we go, I guess. Vladimir Putin wields less power than his alpha dog image, the media portrays. He is alleged to bribe Kremlin figures, that makes him look weaker, or else many of his edicts are not implemented. American diplomats have raised concerns over personal corruption, calling Putin's Russia a mafia state. The Swiss oil trading company Gunvor is rumored to be one of Putin's sources of undisclosed wealth, allegedly bringing its owners billions in profit. Diplomats have also discussed Putin's very close relationship with Italian Prime Minister, of course, and the pair enjoyed such a close relationship that they shared a direct line. It's suspected Berlusconi's personal relationship with Putin influenced the sale of part of Russia's state-owned Gazprom's oil subsidiary Gazpromneft to Italian Eni. The April 4, 2008 NATO-Russia Council Summit in Bucharest, Romania, Putin implicitly challenged the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Well, we're seeing that now. So the only thing here that actually speaks to his weakness within Russia is this right here. He is alleged to bribe Kremlin figures or else many of his edicts are not implemented. That's the only sentence that's relevant to the things that I'm saying here. I could look more into that. I'll look more into that. After all, him having to bribe figures kind of indicates that they wouldn't do what he told them if he didn't give them money, which is an indication that he could be more powerful than he is now. But if he has essentially an unlimited amount of money, then it's possible that bribery is just the easiest way for him to maintain that control. It doesn't really matter. We don't have any control over this stuff. It's just... that's just another way of saying he controls the flow of money and power through the state. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it could be the bribes or just the way in which he does it. But he says, or else many of his edicts are not implemented. I wonder, it would depend on how that's... Keep in mind that American ambassadors would also be politically incentivized to downplay Putin's strength. You can imagine a U.S. ambassador writing in their time abroad in Russia, like, he's not as strong as he says. Well, that seems like a common thing to say, I doubt they would be writing glowing reviews of his incredible control over the oligarchy he's at the top of. Yeah, I don't know. It's scary stuff, really. It all sounds rather novel, doesn't it? I mean, in America, politics is all, let's be fair, really boring. I mean, it's interesting, don't get me wrong, but it's hardly, dramatic novel worthy. I mean, not the way some other countries are. Some other countries, though, I mean, they're talking about Putin like world leader, world domination. Like, these are weird terms, right? What's world domination for America? American world domination is as banal and as lifeless and as corporate as every other part of America. World domination for America is allowing American businesses to make deals in countries all around the world and sell their goods at high prices while exploiting natural resources for cheap. That's world control for America. It's factories all over the world. That's American global dominance, It's not some big dramatic map of the world with red arrows crossing over it as we, our armies invade or blah, blah. It's just corporate control. But there are other countries that have different ideas.